term secularism was coined by, I believe, George Holyoake in the 1850s. And this word was coined because if somebody was called atheist, it was punishable by death in some of the countries. So now, 2 centuries later, we've come to a stage where that is not going to take place. I mean, nobody's going to get a death penalty. And secularism in a lot of countries have different meanings. For example, in India, it's completely opposite. When you're talking about a state which has nothing to do with religion, it's completely the opposite in India. So is it time to have a new definition of secularism? And how do we define secularism in the 20th century? Because the original meaning is totally lost.
No, we should simply restore the original meaning. Secularism already had a meaning long before Nehru appropriated the word. It means state neutrality vis-à-vis religion. Nirpekshata. Because the Hindi word conveys the meaning quite well. So we simply have to go back to that. There's nothing wrong with that concept. It was only distorted by the Nehruvians. That has lasted for some 70 years. Now it's enough. Now we just simply go back to the real meaning of the word.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions. The first question is that taking pride in one's religion or one's religious identity, is that same as being chauvinistic and going to the extent of forcing oneself to adopt that Abrahamic mentality, which would ultimately lead to the perishment of our Hindu religion in itself? Because we Hindus do not believe in such kind of aggression, especially when it comes to religious beliefs. And my second question is directed to the recent developments which are taking place. When if those protections, you were talking about several articles, if those protections had not been granted then, that would that had not led to the perishment of the minorities like our neighbors would have had witnessed?
Okay. Well, the first one is fairly simple. Taking pride in your religion is not exactly the same as chauvinism. Chauvinism mainly means the attitude you have towards the others. And I don't see much Hindu chauvinism. I see a lot of Indian chauvinism in the mouth of many Hindus, namely, when they fulminate against the West. There I think, it's a complete mistake. Often they don't know much about the West, even though they get classes in English and so on. They have much more access to Western culture than vice versa. You see, that Westerners are completely clueless about India. That's not good, but I know where it comes from. If Indians are clueless about the West, sorry, that's chauvinism coming in. At least, among those who are chauvinistic. I don't really know of Hindu chauvinism. Probably you know about it. At any rate, it's not the same thing as taking pride in your religion, obviously. But you see, the more interesting question was the second one, namely, isn't it necessary to discriminate against the majority in order to protect the minorities? There is a law professor in India called Ratna Kapoor, whom I have heard some 5 years ago arguing at length that discrimination is a good thing, that it is necessary. You see, this is very, very, very exceptional, because most Indian secularists and their parents abroad are going to say that India is a secular state, that all religions are treated equal, and that these dirty, vicious Hindu chauvinists are threatening that secularism. Now, okay, you see, I can understand where this comes from, because you've had situations in the West where minorities did need protection. in the history of religion, of course, very obvious. When you see how Christianity conquered Europe, it was by, well, only partly by violence. You know, here and there you have like the conquest by Charlemagne of Saxony in Germany. That was a bloody affair. They were forced to become Christians and so on. But mostly, there already the Christian missionaries developed a great knowledge of mass psychology, of, you know, all the ways of modern advertisement, marketing, and so on. They did everything right to make Christianity penetrate as far as possible with the least possible resistance. Okay? Like for instance, they allowed people to keep on worshipping at their own places of worship, only they gradually brought in Christian elements. So you had still Thor being standing there, but you know, the crucifix was added to it. Or like a sacred place just near mine where I live, you see there was a sacred tree. Now, in the beginning, the missionaries chopped down sacred trees. You know, there's a famous image of Saint Boniface with an axe. In fact, the people didn't like it. Ultimately, he was killed and eaten by the Frisians. You know, they still boast, we ate Saint Boniface. Anyway, in this case, the tree was not chopped down. Instead, an image of the Virgin Mary was hung in the tree. Then one of the pagans came by, he didn't like it, he wanted to take the image away, and then the Christian story goes, he was paralyzed on the spot. But then fortunately a Christian came by who hung the statue back in the tree, and then he was released from his paralysis. And so now it's a sacred place where people go on pilgrimages also. Okay? So that's the Christian approach. Nevertheless, there was also quite a bit of violence, especially once Christianity was in place. And then you get like the Cathars in south of France, you know, a heresy. Or for instance, the Jews were not really persecuted, but they were kept in ghettos. They were denied quite a number of rights. They couldn't exercise certain professions and so on. So yes, you see there things happen that make you say, well, the minorities need protection. Now, today when they think of protection of minorities, you see this mostly emanates from America, where it mostly concerns race. You see, in terms of religion, the American formula is pretty good. You see, they protect the churches from the state. In France, it's the other way around. They protect the state from religion. In America, they accept religion, but they don't want religion to interfere, and they don't want the state to interfere in religion. And so there you see you have a pretty pluralistic, nice system, that's okay. But there you have the matter of race. You see there you have, you know, the blacks have a terrible history. And even later, after they were released from slavery, they were still pretty much discriminated against. So you see, it took a lot of activism to correct all that. Which incidentally is why Westerners are so worked up about caste. Because you see, they have this history of, you know, enforcing social justice at great cost, you know, the Civil War in America and so on. Or like England, for instance, fought on behalf of Turkey the Crimea War against Russia, because Turkey had already been too weakened by then. But the price they exacted for all the lives they gave and all the costs they made for this war was that Turkey was forced to abolish slavery. Okay? So you see, the West, whatever their history of slavery, also has a pretty glorious history of the abolition of slavery. Indeed, I dare interject myself here with a mention of my own country. Unlike our neighbors in Holland, in France, and in England, we never had slaves. The only involvement of Belgium with slavery is that it waged the war in the Congo to abolish slavery. Aha! Okay? Now, but you see, from this history, you get a mentality in the West that we have to do something about slavery wherever it still exists. And so then you get this propaganda that the caste system is a type of slavery, and you know, it's insufficiently realized in the West that it has been abolished and all that. Moreover, to make it worse, it is deemed to be racial slavery. And this is where the Aryan invasion theory comes in. You see, the Aryans were white and they came into India, and the dark natives were enslaved, or at least were put in the confinement of caste, and they were oppressed by the white upper caste who were invaders, right? So, you know, the whole history of how America was colonized by European powers, by Christians, that is projected onto India. And so, you know, there is this strong drive against caste, and that's why many people consider Hinduism somewhat evil, you know. And so the propaganda that in Islam there is equality, which is not true, of course, but anyway, that propaganda goes down well. And so many people, like Macaulay, Thomas Babington Macaulay, who imposed English on Indian education, you know, he said explicitly that, okay, you know, we shouldn't interfere in the religious affairs of these miserable backward Indians, but if we do, then it should be on the side of the Mohammedans, because they were still deemed a bit more familiar to Christians than these ugly, vicious pagans, meaning you. So you see, from there you get the psychology that something must be done for the minorities. Now, to project that principle onto India is so silly, it's so counter to Indian history. You see, there has never been a time when the Hindu majority oppressed the minorities. You see, for Europeans with their history of oppression of the minorities, this may come as a surprise, but really, you can't tell me of any example in Indian history where the majority oppressed the minorities. The other way around, by contrast, yes. And so, you see, whether reservations for the blacks in America are the solution or not, that is debatable. But the historical fact that the blacks were oppressed, that is there. That can't be argued with. Now, in the case of India, it's just the opposite counts. You see that Hindus treated minorities well. That's a fact of history. That the minorities did not, is also a fact of history. And indeed, you see, if some injustice in the past should be compensated, you know, then it should be the other way around. It's not like this Ratna Kapoor says that Hindus have an obligation of you know, appeasing the minorities and of compensating the poor, hapless position of the minorities. That's not the position of the minorities at all. Historically, Hindus have converted to Christianity or to Islam when it was in their interest, or often when they were forced to. You know, I'll even leave that out. But you see, often you had a case like under the Mughals, you know, you had some quarrel with your neighbor, you went to court, and you found out, oh, but Muslims are always treated better in court than Hindus. So you converted to Islam, and you won your trial. So, who are the Indian Muslims? They are people who have chosen privilege. They are people who have again scrambled for the exit door and left. You see, are there any Hindus here? You see, if there are, yeah, I mean, it's impressive that there still are so many. You see, if there are, you know, there's one good thing I want to say about you.
Those who lay hands and those who don't.
Well, you know, all of you. You see, the one good thing about you, maybe there's more good things about you, but one good thing that I can already see is you people are not rats. You see, Hinduism at the moment is a sinking ship. And so the rats are the ones who leave the sinking ship, or who try to. Well, you people don't. So that's, I appreciate that about you. But so you see, that's the short of my answer. There is nothing that Hindus have to compensate for, you know. And, you know, maybe the others ought to do some compensation for what their ancestors did, or maybe not. But I don't want to press that point. I don't think they should pay compensation or anything. Just equality is good enough.
Sir, you said that ideally secularism should mean state neutrality vis-a-vis religion.
Yeah.
But don't you think in India that would be unjust to the Indian religions, considering that Christianity, especially Christianity, is very aggressively proselytizing religion? We are at a disadvantage. Not only Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs and Jains also animists. Very few remain now, but so that is number one. And secondly, your idea of fighting missionary activity only through ideas in an large section of population which is still uneducated, do not have enough to eat. They are being bribed and through propaganda converted. Ideas is a long-term process. We need some short-term answers in terms of blocking this funding and action on the street. And Hindus who wish that their grandchildren also remain Hindu, what should they do? I mean, concrete action for this. Thank you so much.
Yes, I admit I do not have the whole answer. The situation is quite serious in that regard. Like, for instance, you see conversions are not only numerous among the tribals or among the pariahs. Like, for instance, there are many Sikhs getting converted. People don't know that. It's not part of the stereotype. Or, for instance, you see, for those Indian chauvinists who complain about, the missionary activity being part of white supremacism or something, or American imperialism, the fact is that today, 99% or so of the missionaries are native. Some organizations are still controlled from Houston or New York or so, but very largely this is a native affair. Moreover, worse than that, India is now a net exporter of missionaries. There are Indian missionaries going to Africa, going to Europe, of all places. So, you see, Christianity is now very much part of the fabric of India. It's also larger than the figures in the census say, because many Christians are instructed not to, make public that they are Christians, also as a matter of keeping caste reservations and so on. They don't change their names anymore. Often you can't say that, this must be a Christian. So yeah, I can perfectly understand that you're concerned about this. Now, to what extent should the law solve that problem? I'm temperamentally rather inclined to say, well, this is not a matter for the law. This is civil society that should act. It's not, now we can lay back and the law will take care of it. But nevertheless, you see, I can understand your position, and ultimately it's Indians themselves who have to decide. In the conference 2 days ago, it was said that, it was proposed that the law concerning freedom of religion, including propagation of religion, that first of all the word propagation should be left out, but they even go for a complete ban on conversions, with the footnote that conversion to Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on is not conversion. Now, I don't think that you can sell that. You see, that would be certainly challenged. They can pay for lawyers, don't worry. And on demand, you see, they can pay a Hindu to, go for them so that he isn't attacked as a Christian defending his own thing. So I don't think that'll wash, and of course internationally it will create a storm of protest. And now many Indians are very proud to say, oh, we don't care about Western opinions anymore. Fine, but I think you do care. If you see the American influence in Bollywood, or, the BJP so far has tried to live up to secularists. Part of that secularist pressure is also the foreigners who are parrots of the Indian secularists, and who have the prestige of American institutions and so on behind them. And so Indians look up to that. So that factor still plays a role. And so you see, to say we're going to prohibit conversions, I don't know if you can pull that off. Now, on the other hand, sometimes you just have to, ignore world opinion. This is what happened with Kashmir, with Article 370. You see, everybody was mesmerized by this secularist idea that, Kashmir needs a special status. Now, that turned out not to be true. You see, when Article 370 was abolished, Modi got a very large majority for it in parliament, like more than 2/3 majority in the Rajya Sabha and even more in the Lok Sabha. Several opposition parties joined him. Several members of Congress who officially were against it, voted against their own party with the government. So you see, that really was a people's vote. You see, everybody, the whole of India was in favor of the integration of Kashmir. And, in foreign countries, there are still protests against that. I mean, there is, of course, Pakistani protest. But, all these Western leftist intellectuals they are in favor of open borders. They are against Donald Trump's wall against Mexico. They are against Brexit that recreates a border between Britain and Europe. They are for open borders. And yet suddenly, because of Kashmir, they have discovered the virtue of borders. Not even just international borders, but a border between one province and the rest of the country. You see, this is so absurd. And, it was already an absurd situation that you have a sovereign state, and yet you are not allowed to go into a part of your own country. What is this? No sovereign state would accept that. And so, you see, Modi did nothing but normalize the situation. You see, I mean, this made no sense, the special status of Kashmir. So he re-normalized the situation. In fact, the amendments to these discriminatory articles in the Constitution are also simply a normalization. They simply restore common sense. There's nothing Hindu fanatic about it or so, it's just normal. But so ultimately, you see, I admit that conversions are a difficult problem, and so I am in favor of the approach of persuasion. Nevertheless, maybe sometimes it may be so acute that something more is needed. I leave it to you to decide.